So maybe we can start by having a motion to approve the minutes of the November 9th committee hearing. They were distributed to the committee earlier today.
So move.
We have a motion by Mayor Williams, second by, was that Pat?
Jay Cole.
Jay, okay. Bridget, will you take the roll on the minutes, please?
Yes. Holberg?
Yes.
Bell? Bell?
Yes.
Pat Thorne?
Yes.
Cole?
Yes.
Hoffman?
Yes.
Hoffman? Hovland?
Aye. Yes.
Couch?
She'll be late today.
Loon?
Yes.
McGuire?
Yes.
Sabjam?
Yeah.
Schember?
Yes.
Chiramo?
Yes.
Weaver?
Yes.
Williams?
Yes.
Zhao?
Yes.
All right, thank you. So today is our second to the last scheduled meeting. I don't think that there's going to be, I'm hoping there won't be a need for anything beyond this meeting and the next. And so we have the draft of the findings that was sent out to everybody. And I know that there was more information requested about the suburban transit issue, but I'm wondering if maybe we can start with a discussion of the general tone and layout of the draft recommendations and the first two items, and then get to the suburban transit issue before we look at the third section of the recommendation. So are there any comments, questions, input? Judd.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I got a bad feedback here.
We're going to cut you off, Judd. Did we lose Judd?
I think he's going to sign back on.
Okay. Well, in the meantime, does anybody have any input, comments? Pat?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think the format of this is really good. I like kind of stating each of the three questions, making the findings, and then followed by the potential actions, and then any minority report. I think that is a way of documenting our discussions, at least what I heard last week. And I think for the most part, the draft we're seeing today reflects last week's discussion. Maybe people have thought again about these issues and want to weigh in again, but I think the format is good. It's responsive to what the governor has asked for, and I think at least reflects the discussions we've had so far. I'm sure that once a full report is done, all the minutes of the meetings and documents we've seen and all that kind of documentary record will be put together too. But for the most part, the meat of our work here, I think, is well organized.
Okay, thank you. Looks like we have Judd back. You want to try again?
Well, let's try this. Is that better?
Yeah.
All right. What I was going to say is, well, first of all, thanks, Pat, for those comments. We were hoping that we were kind of hitting the right tone and process for bringing this forward. But what I was going to mention is that we have a legislative commission on metropolitan government meeting going on simultaneously right now. And so I know many of you have in your roles with the Met Council or Met Council observers remember those meetings well. And so we just went through our budget, and now we're having a discussion on some transitway issues that are little differences of opinions. And so that is happening right now, and Nick Thompson is currently handling part of that discussion since it deals with the red line. And Nick is who I need over on our side here to be able to walk through some of that information. And so all I was going to say until I ruined all of your ears was I support us walking through the first couple portions of those findings before we get to the last part and talk about kind of the transit information that we sent before. So I apologize for that, but let's please proceed with the process that you laid out. So long story longer, thank you.
Right. Thank you. So let's start by saying, is there anybody that has any concerns about the general layout or approach that we've taken in the draft? Yeah, I don't see any hands up or unmutes. Okay, that's good. So then let's start as our first charge, the role of elected versus appointed Met Council members. Does anybody have any concerns, comments, input on the draft, its recommendations, items to consider, edits? Tom Weaver, you can just unmute and, you know.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just at the very end of this section, the last bullet under potential actions for consideration says, consider requiring the governor provide an explanation in writing if he or she appoints someone off the list. What's the point of that? I'm trying to understand. I'm not sure that does anything. I mean, the governor, if he wants to appoint off the list, he can still do it. And he's just going to tell his staff to write a reason why. And I don't see that as influencing a governor's actions in any way.
All right, Judd, do you remember where was that a recommendation of the League of Women Voters, or I can't remember where that came up. Maybe Janet remembers.
I don't remember, but as being a member of that committee for the last 2 times, there was only one instance where that occurred. And so I think traditionally that has not been an issue. I don't know where it came from.
Yep. Madam Chair, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but was it Pahua who raised that at our last meeting? I'm not 100% sure. For the purpose of trying to make sure that all the points that members were making, we were trying to, just throw in this rough draft, some comments to make sure that we were kind of hitting things right down the fairway here. And we obviously, if the committee would like to remove that bullet point, we certainly could. But I just wanted to make sure that, those of us who are trying to put this together weren't doing any editing that the committee wasn't supportive.
Madam Chair, Judd, I can respond quickly. I agree with Tom. I don't think that in the Citizens Inc. study, we were asking for the governor to respond why they did not pick off the list. I think we were just simply asking for the finalists to be publicly posted somewhere so that we could see who were the finalists, knowing that the governor can make a decision off that list. And so we didn't ask for that extra step. And so if that somehow got in here, it's not something that the citizens ignore. I personally would have supported.
All right, Mayor Williams?
Well, it seems to me that through the processes, this was a very open process because when there were hundreds of applications and then we interviewed 2 or 3, depending on the recommendation from the governor, they had an opportunity to see who that was then, to see who we were interviewing and to also comment on what, if they had any comments about any one of the candidates as we were interviewing them. So it seems that there's ample opportunity ahead of time to address some of that, along with some of the comments that came up about the nominating committee, and that many districts felt that the nominees were not, contacting them. And I think part of that is it's a two-way street, that we talked about that with each one of the candidates that we interviewed, but sometimes if the actual council district wasn't happy, then it was a different situation. It seems to me that an explanation shouldn't be necessary after we've gone through the whole process.
All right. Connie.
Yeah, so point of clarification for me. So what's, on this subject, what's going to be different than how the world is now, that, and it would hopefully address the issues that the folks have who every year seem to not be happy with the structure, is that we're proposing a staggered council member terms, and also expanding the nominating committee when so there's more representation. So those who are not happy with this situation, but were selected versus elected, that they would have a say in who was on the council. Is that how it's going to be different than what it is now?
That would be the gist of the recommendations, or potential actions for consideration, as we've titled them. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, because I'm just hoping what the work that we do here, what's recommended, hopefully goes toward a path of not having to deal with the issue every year. Because there seems like there's folks who think this is the way we have it structured in Minnesota. It's, some say illegal and or whatever. So that's, hopefully it'll go away. Maybe it never will. But it looks like we're taking some steps, as long as it's something different and substantial, where folks would be more satisfied. It addresses their concerns, specifically what causes them problems, and we will address them.
Okay, so any more comments, Doug?
Madam Chair, just I guess a comment and maybe a question. If you look at the conclusions and findings in the set of 4 bullets, the last one speaks to a lack of consensus towards making fundamental or large reorganization efforts, but yet then the potential actions for consideration suggest some changes in structure, such as the staggered terms, as Connie just pointed out, and exchanges in the nominating process. So one seems to preclude the second, and I would suggest that we make some adjustments to that bullet that mentions the lack of consensus, except for those recommended by the committee, noted here. Otherwise, you're basically ruling out any changes, and we actually are suggesting changes to this, which I think are meaningful and needed.
Yeah, and I think what we're trying to do there is to say that among local elected officials, cities, counties, that there wasn't consensus.
I get your point there. I guess it kind of seeks to preclude any changes, but yet we're suggesting changes.
Okay, so we need to maybe look at maybe massaging that paragraph a little bit to make it clearer. Okay.
Or strike it all together.
Okay.
Because it seems to run contrary to what we're trying to accomplish.
I'm good with striking it too. So let's hear from Mary Jo and then Jim, and we'll try and move forward.
Thanks. I appreciate what you're saying and that maybe we tweak it. I actually don't mind it being there because I think there's not a consensus that we fundamentally change the Met Council. I mean, there's generally a sense that, we don't want to get a lot of people, some of the debate goes around whether we should eliminate the Met Council or not, which would be tough to do because it has such a function that we need. But, I think we're not suggesting that. We are suggesting some changes, but not fundamental, like eliminating it or having it be elected versus, I guess we do say that, in the next one. I'm for massaging it a little bit because I think, there isn't this strong urge to do that we have a consensus on to do anything. Like I said, I think the word for me that helps with this sentence is fundamental, but I don't have any trouble massaging it. So
I think the challenge is in the first sentence that speaks to the current appointment structure as a lack of consensus, but yet that's what we're suggesting that we're going to change. So maybe just adjust that first sentence.
Yeah. Okay.
Broader lack of consensus to the overall.
Yeah.
Yep. That makes sense.
Okay. I can see that.
Thank you.
Because then I think that's why, Madam Chair, if I could have one other point.
Certainly.
Thank you. Okay. So then I'm down on the potential actions for consideration that I don't disagree with the last point on that page about the governor providing an explanation in writing. I'm okay with striking that if that's what the will is to do that. I have a question about the one above that, which is that we require in statute that the nominating committee be expanded to a majority of local elected officials. I don't mind having there be some elected officials on there. I'm not sure that I need there to be a majority of elected officials. I'm just curious who brought that up and whether it needs to be a majority. I would just like a little more conversation about that. Like I said, I'm okay with some elected officials on the nominating committee, but I don't think we should strap the nominating committee. But just curious what other people think.
Jim,
Comments?
Jim. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry I'm late too. We had a wide area internet outage from Comcast at my office, so I had to hustle up to City Hall here. So apologize for being a little late. I think Janet may have some insight on this issue.
Yeah, so Mayor, that's because everybody's trying to have a week's worth of meetings in 2 days. Right? So Mayor Williams.
Well, the nominating committee is made up of local elected officials. So I don't know what you're talking about. If you're talking about expanding it like it happened the last time with Governor Walz, then it was all elected officials plus, like it always has been, with one business person, but with 4 other people representing different areas, one the Hispanic, one the Indigenous, etc. So that was how it changed, which might be good, but it still was made up of elected officials, and one representing each county, an elected official in some form electing from each county that was in that document that we got a couple meetings ago.
Okay, Mayor Hovland and then Judd.
All right. All right, thank you. I'm going to come back to that in a moment here, but really what Doug got us thinking about was the fact that when you look at these proposed findings, there's really only 2 findings here, and it's the first 2 bullet points, which I think should be in the first sentence in each of those should be bold. We should number them. The 3rd and 4th ones are really subsets of number 2, which is the council members should not be sitting local elected officials. And the last 2 bullets, 3 and 4, are really explanatory as to why people should not be local elected officials sitting as Met Council members, either in whole or in part composed of local elected officials. So I would take the bullet points 3 and 4 and move them in so that they are their own separate paragraphs, but subsets as bullet points of number 2, and then label out clearly that our number 1 finding is council members should not be directly elected. Put that in bold. And then put the council needs to focus on the best interests of the entire region. I would interlineate that language. And then in number 2, council members should not be sitting local elected officials. Metropolitan Council made up, I think, in whole or in part, should not be made up in whole or in part by local elected officials. I think that's what we're getting to here. And then on number, when we get down below where it says potential actions for consideration, these are really more than that, I think, in terms of what I've heard from our conversations. We're actually recommending, the way I took the tone of our conversation, I think that paragraph should be titled recommended future actions, and that the first bullet point should actually say provide in statute for staggered 4-year terms, not consider, but that's our recommendation, as the way I understood what we were doing or suggesting. And then I don't have that same concern that Doug has about what he thinks is an inconsistency, because the 4th bullet point deals with the appointment structure, and the first bullet point under recommended actions deals with the staggered 4-year term issues. So it is true that they're structural, but they're different kinds of issues that we're trying to address there. And then I'm comfortable taking number 4 or number 3 out underneath potential actions for consideration, where the governor has to provide a written explanation. Then back to the issue that Janet was just talking about, and Mary Jo was inquiring about, I think it's important that we have either a majority or all local elected officials on that nominating committee, because it's one more layer of local representation and one more barrier for someone to have in front of them that's trying to attack the notion that this is representation without, taxation without representation, if you will, that they're not duly elected on the Met Council. So the people that are actually making the recommendations are indeed elected officials. I think that helps.
Well, and I think Pahua just posted the fact that the current law does not require a majority of elected, so. Mayor Williams?
Well, but that's what's been happening, is that there is an elected official from each county. Now, it may not be a commissioner or a mayor, like for Ramsey County, it was their attorney. But according to the way it's been operating in the last few years, there has been five, at least that many elected officials on there.
I think the bottom line is does the committee believe that it should be in law that it be a majority of elected? Chair Bell.
Madam Chair, I believe that it should be at least a majority of the nominating committee elected officials. There's been a fair amount of consternation that the Met Council is not responsive enough to elected officials. And while this would not eliminate that concern, it would reduce it. And it would tether council members a bit more, not completely, a bit more to elected officials. And I think all in all, that's a good thing.
Okay, thank you.
Plus, it is stated in there, while we have many people apply who are elected officials, if they are appointed, they have to give up their elected position. And that happened the last time, 2 mayors for sure.
Right. Okay, so let's go back to where we started. Is there anybody that feels like the bullet point that Tom Weaver thought was not necessary about the written explanation? Is there anybody that would have major heartburn if we delete that from the recommendation? Okay, well, Pahua?
I don't have major heartburn about eliminating that bullet, but I would like us to consider adding in a bullet about the public announcement of the final candidates, so that the public sees who the nomination committee is putting forward, as you know, information notification, and the governor can choose to do what they will. But I think this piece of public announcement is missing from the potential actions and consideration.
All right, do we have a thumbs up on that comment? Everybody good with that? Okay. Anything else?
I just have a question about that, you know, from like kind of an equity and an inclusion standpoint. Are there any concerns about, you know, requiring that to be so public for people who are on a short list? No, nobody, everyone thinks it's totally fine. I'm looking at people not shaking their heads. Just because, I mean, if you don't get it, then does it potentially limit your pool of potential candidates who don't necessarily want their name listed publicly, but would do it if they were appointed?
Well, I think the names of the applicants are public coming in. So by just identifying the finalists, I mean, somebody could figure, I mean, I think because you're already public, and because if you want the ability to provide input to the governor on the finalists as opposed to the entire pool of people being considered, about the only way to do that is to make the finalists public. Mary Jo? You're muted.
I was thinking the same thing as Aline was saying, that like, do we want them to have to go public? But I forgot that they're already public, that they're going for it. But I'm curious. I don't know how else, what we could do to make it easier. Paul, where are you thinking they should make it public? Do they have to? They don't have to put it in the paper. Do they just have to put it on the website that they're the finalists? I mean, I'm just thinking they don't have to broadcast it or anything. They can just put it on the website. That's still public, right? I'm just curious what you're thinking.
I can't remember now whether the Citizenship report offered specific examples. I know what Governor Walz did was, in announcing who were going to be the members, they listed who were the finalists alongside that. So it went out to the press, to the media. And I think that would be fine, I think, for most people just to see it. And I think it is newsworthy enough that some media would pick it up, but I don't think we made any specific recommendations there.
And Madam Chair, if I could just follow up then, as if we want that it has to be named, is that okay that it's named? They don't have to name all the finalists beforehand, or they can name them after the selection. I'm just curious what we're thinking if we're going to get specific about our recommendation.
In the Citizenship recommendation, it was just to name the top 3 candidates per district. And Madam Chair, Mary Jo, this was in response to criticism that we had received that in the past, the governor would make appointments not from the list after the hard work of the nominations committee. And so this was to daylight, if you will, the work of the nominations committee to say, these are the names we're putting forward. Now, the governor can choose outside of this list. And this might be why the last bullet ended up there, is the governor may have to explain, not that we are requiring the governor to have to explain why he or she chose members outside of that list.
Well, and I don't think waiting to make the finalists public till after the announcement makes sense. I mean, if you're gonna do it, I think you should do it when the nominating committee finalizes its list to forward to the governor. That's when I think it should be public. Yes, everybody on that one? Okay. So any more discussion on the first section? Okay, going once, twice? All right, let's.
Wait, Madam Chair.
Yes.
When you just quick, I'm sorry. I wanted to. I don't know when you said. Is it all that part of the discussion? I like what Jim Hovland was saying just about the organization of it. Like, you know, that we are actually considering those are not potential actions. We're actually doing that, and then items 1 and 2 above that. That's what we are recommending. That are you? What are you asking for our approval on? Just sort of everything, or
more? I think that the mayor provided some good input for the structural changes. I'm more concerned about content and tone, and we'll get out a new draft to the committee before our final meeting, and so hopefully we get pretty dang close to being done on that draft and have a short meeting on December 8th or whatever date it is. So that's my intent, is to more to content, maybe less to form. But certainly those are really good suggestions that'll make the report better. So anything else on section 1? Okay, on to Metropolitan Council's role as a MPO. You can, if you have comments, questions, you can just unmute and jump in, or. Anybody? Seriously? I mean, I'm not complaining, but. So, Mayor, I think what we would do is look for your structural input. Maybe you and I can go offline on this, and
Sure.
If you want different headings or bold or subpoints, you had good ideas in the first section, and if you want to carry that approach to the remaining 2 sections, I think we can just do that in the interim and not online here today. How does that sound?
Sounds fine. I'll mark this up and then send it to Judd and then to you, Madam Chair.
Perfect. Thank you. Jerry.
Yeah, Madam Chair and everyone, this is a comment actually not only to point second, maybe applying to others as well. Like in the format that we have, I was wondering whether we can expand the beginning portion a little bit before we talk about committee conclusion and findings. The idea is we are something charged this commission to look into, and the issues, particularly what are the debates at stake. I think adding some of those things in the first part, I think that would be helpful.
Okay, so you want a little beefing up of the subparagraphs under each item before we get into conclusion and findings. Okay, yes. So a little more of the cliff notes or history,
especially the debates. Yep. And the things that we are trying to provide recommendation about.
Okay. So with that, I think what we'll do is we'll circle you in on the round of draft before we go out to committee, so you can we'll take a run at it, and then you can provide feedback for that.
Madam Chair.
Mary Jo.
Yeah, thanks.
You're muted.
I was unmuted before. Just as Jim was saying, now these are not potential actions, so it's a bigger deal if it's a recommendations versus a potential action. So now if you're thinking of changing these potential actions to actual recommendations, right? I mean, is that what the proposal will come back to us as? I'm just clarifying. I don't have any trouble with it. I don't have any issue with it, I guess. So, but I just want to be clear that that's what we're thinking then. Instead of potential actions for consideration, it'll be recommendations.
Right.
Madam Chair.
Yes. Let's see.
Mr. Schumber.
Okay. Oh, I don't see your face. That's
Oh,
why.
I'm sorry. I have my video on, so maybe it'll catch up
Oh,
here.
yeah, we don't
Quick question.
We have your name and a little gold triangle, whatever that means.
Interesting. Maybe not enough bandwidth.
Okay.
In bullet 1, so in this section, we're making a fairly large case that the MPO is working and that it's grandfathered in. Then in bullet 1, we seem to weaken that position by saying, well, if DOT or FHWA or FTA change their mind for whatever reason, then our position may change. And I might be taking that too far, but it seems to weaken the position that one of these three might, under any administration, change a position, and then it throws this all up into a question again, which I understand it might at least cause us to look at it again. But I wonder why we're leading with that when they've already acknowledged, and why would we bring that up again, that they may consider it.
Well, I guess from my perspective, when I read that, it was trying to make the point that, or maybe underline the point that absent somebody forcing this change, it was a pretty big thing to even try and undertake. I mean,
and okay, and then I would see that's a stronger statement, that we would position this as, unless forced to, we wouldn't be making a change. That just if it happens to be an opinion of a new agency or a new agency's administration, we wouldn't take under advisement a new position on this. And I'll stop there. I just wanted to get that out there, that it seemed to weaken the position of the committee.
do you want to take a stab at a rewrite of that and forward it to Judd?
Sure, happy to.
Okay. Anybody else? Aileen?
Yeah, I agree with George. I had a very similar kind of interpretation of it, as well as just thinking about the USDOT as the umbrella organization with FTA and FHWA as operating agencies within it. So here it makes it sound like we're talking about three separate entities, but it's really the USDOT and then the modal administrations. So I'd be happy to take a look at whatever George kind of redrafts there, because I think I had the same perspective of that this weakens the position. It's really that we have the statutory authority, and in addition to statutory authority, we have these agencies who have over many years reaffirmed it. The only other comment I had was kind of in the potential actions for consideration, which I recognize we might be calling recommendations, was I wanted to clarify the first bullet that the tab would consider requiring a supermajority for 3/5 vote on actions and recommendations from the tab to the council, and wanted to just check in to make sure that I understood the scope of what the actions and recommendations from tab to the council are. Like, are we just talking about the specific suite of projects in the regional solicitation, that being a really important recommendation that goes in, or are there other things that I might have forgotten about that are kind of included in that? And does that seem like it's like a kind of a high bar if it's more than just the regional solicitation?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, I would say it would be both, and trying to recognize that just barely half of the tab is actually elected versus appointed, so that you would get, so you couldn't have one side of the table running the place, basically. And I guess from my history, while short, I don't think that it's ever been that closely divided in any vote. And there's certainly Mayor Hovland's the expert on tab, but
is the scope of this just the solicitation recommendation?
Well,
no, there's all kinds of actions that the tab's involved in that involve action that we have to send with the recommendation to the it's monthly. They're beyond the biennial regional solicitation. There's monthly action we have to moved up to that council with a recommendation.
But, and I think that in my mind, it would be for items that were serving the role of the MPO. So certainly, you know, not things on meeting dates but when it was under actions required under federal regs for a metropolitan planning organization, that those action items would have a slightly higher bar.
But Madam Chair, you recall that we even have, even these so-called streamlining items, we have to make a recommendation to the Met Council on modifying the scope of work or including a particular project that gets modified by Dakota County, for example, into the transportation, into the TIP. So all those actions that we take at the tab then get moved on up with recommended action for the Met Council. So there's quite a bit of activity that we get involved in where it's just more regular business of the day, if you will, and not rising to the level of the regional solicitation where we're trying to figure out how to spend $200 million biennially in a fair and equitable way. So I'm not sure what to think about the 2/3 requirement. It seems to me like most things go up there in a simple majority vote.
I think it's a way to try and get at the fact that it's a split half and half, elected versus appointed, on the tab. And given the fact that Met Council is not elected and the elected function is served by the tab, but it's a weak level of the body of a whole.
Well, all I can say is I'm just thinking about if we have a scope change on a project that comes up from the county that they previously got federal money for, and we have to approve that scope change and then amend it into the TIP. That doesn't seem to me to be the kind of action that would necessarily require a 2/3 approval, and maybe we don't even want that. But I'd like to think that through a little bit, maybe between now and the next meeting, and maybe have a conversation with you and staff on that.
And it's just a 60%, it's not a 2/3. So, any other comments on the MPO section? Connie?
Okay, it's kind of similar to the previous item. So what, you know, under the paragraph that says committee minority counterpoint, the first sentence talks about local elected officials voice dissatisfaction with the current process. So assuming that's going to stay in the report, so that'll always be there, that there's some dissatisfaction by some folks. So my question would be that maybe Mayor Hovland would know, are we doing enough with the tab here and what's recommended in those 2 bullets to address that? And I don't know specifically what all the dissatisfactions may be. So changing the tab into a TB or TPB, Transportation Planning Board, or could it be more, maybe just like you suggested in the having more elected officials participating in selecting or nominating the nomination committee? Would that help alleviate the issue at tab? Trying to figure out what all the dissatisfactions are, or are the dissatisfactions simply people are not happy with their projects getting selected? So for every one happy county, there's 3 unhappy counties, and that's just the world we're in. So if that's the issue, that can't go away. There's always going to be winners and losers. So I just want to know if we're doing enough here to be meaningful to help address this and not totally ignore the issue above the NPO. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I don't know exactly how to answer that. I don't think this is going to make people that think that the council should be elected, our recommendations certainly aren't going to make them happy. I mean, I don't, happier, maybe. I don't know. Okay, Tom, you're laughing, so I'm going to ask you what you think.
I don't know that I have anything to add on that. I really don't.
Yeah, I mean, I got, we're the group here is, I don't think, super reform minded as a collective group. I was talking to somebody this morning and they referenced, quote unquote, my report. And I said, oh, this is not my report. My report would be very different than the commission's report. So, I think we have to recognize that the group of people that the governor put together here, is a variety of individuals with different thoughts on the council, and it was probably not likely that the recommendations were going to fall too far out of the center lane, if you will, as far as reforms go.
Yeah, Madam Chair, it just seems to me that the genesis for this whole thing is that the council every year is under attack because it's a non-elected body with taxing jurisdiction, and there seems to always be friction with local units of government. I think, we're taking a pretty good look at potential actions that we can recommend that would, I think, get us into the center lane as you suggested, and at least do something about some of the issues that consistently pop up, and hopefully, they're not perfect solutions. I don't think there are perfect solutions, but I think we're at least moving in a direction that may provide some relief down the road and avoid some of the constant controversy that kind of hangs over the council.
I agree with Tom. I think our recommendations are evolutionary, not revolutionary. And which is, I think, the tone of the committee, and personally, I support them.
Mary Jo.
I just have to say, Madam, that there we go. I just have to say, Madam Chair, I like to think that probably everyone on this call likes to think they're reform minded. If we see reforms we think would make a difference. So I don't want us to say that this is not a reform minded group. And I don't think that, maybe I heard it wrong, but I think we want to see if there's changes that we think would make it much better. I think we'd be open to looking at those. I'm just, I agree with, what people have said about we're evolutionary, not revolutionary. But I would say that I think everyone is, I think we'd support changes that we thought would make a difference. So I don't want to think that we're not a reform-minded group.
Well, and so to that point, I mean, we're talking about tab. I mean, is the group comfortable with a 50-50 tab, or should the tab be a majority of electeds making the recommendation to the appointed council?
Madam Chair, the Judd would have a better calculation on this, but my understanding is that the majority of the 34 folks are elected officials, a slight majority. Mm-hmm. But I think the elections on the tab slightly outnumber the citizens on the tab.
Well, I guess my point is appointed by electeds, not appointed by the governor. So that the majority of the tab would be appointed not by the governor.
Nobody on the tab is appointed
by the governor.
Nobody on the tab is appointed by the governor by statute. There's a statute.
It's his administration. I should say the executive branch.
No, there's a statute that deals specifically with what entities get to nominate people for appointment to the Met Council, and one of the most significant players is metro cities. So there are these organizations that get to nominate people by statute for positions on the tab, but the governor's office, the executive branch, is not involved in any of that selection process.
No.
Well, but wait a second. The MnDOT,
Those are all agency designations that are provided for in statute. We should get that statute, Judd.
right, by the executive branch.
Well,
That's the executive branch, okay?
Yeah, understood, Madam Chair, but by state statute, there are a certain number of agencies that you know from hearing their reports are there because the legislature decided they needed to be there. I don't think the governor decides as the chief executive who is coming over from MnDOT or from the MPCA or from the MAC or even the Met Council. But
right, but they're appointees of the governor's appointee. Okay.
No, I think they're usually career employees. They're bureaucrats.
Okay. All right, I'm not gonna argue anymore. Mary Jo.
It's 4 of them, I think, only, right? Like those 4 we just mentioned. So they would be 4 that would even have that connection, I think.
And
if that's the case.
Yeah. And I think the suburban transit group is asking for an appointee. Is that right? I think that was
one.
Oh,
I think they already have one.
Okay.
Yeah.
They do.
Okay.
We changed that in statute a couple years ago.
Okay.
All right, so now that we're off base, let's get back to our the second section. Any comments on trying to wrap that up? Because our third one's going to take the most time and we're down to a half hour left, so. So do you want to stick with the 60% on the tab or no? Maybe show a thumbs up, thumbs down, or?
Madam Chair, do you think that just given our discussion from the last 10 minutes, it would be worth just having a clear understanding of the people who are on the tab and how they're appointed before we weigh in on that 60% number?
Sure, we can do that. We can bring that to the next meeting, a final to be determined item. How does that sound? Thumbs up? Down? Okay. Anything else in section 2? Other than the 60% yet to be determined. Mayor Williams.
Well, Madam Chair, on the minority report, would it be appropriate to say that a few elected officials? Because if you read through all the studies that we've had, it's not the majority of them that are, then recommendations from all of those studies aren't that a majority of the people are dissatisfied.
Would you say that again? I'm sorry.
Okay, on the committee minority counterpoint, in the first sentence it says local elected officials have voiced dissatisfaction. I think it's a few local officials have voiced dissatisfaction because if you read through all those studies that have done that have been prompted by all of this, they're recommending no change either except one.
Well, I think you had 4 of 7 counties suing the Met Council over this issue.
Right, and so my statement at the last meeting talks about that.
So do you want to rework the language of that to reflect what you think it should say?
Well, I'm just saying that when you read that statement, it's like it might imply that there are a lot of them and it's 7 counties versus 187 cities or something. So, you know, my comment is that when you read that, it seems like there's a lot of elected officials, and I'm not sure that's the way it is. And it depends on everybody else, but that's my comment.
Mayor Williams, how would you feel about saying some elected officials?
That would be better.
Well, and I mean, we also saw the bill that passed, was it through the Senate last year, 2 years ago? you know, so,
It was both the House and Senate.
oh, did it? So Mayor Williams, do you want us to try and rewrite that, or do you want to rewrite it?
No, I think to just change it to some elected official, local elected officials have voiced dissatisfaction would be an acceptable alternative.
Okay.
At least for me.
Okay, does that work for everybody else? Thumbs up? Okay, all right, anything
Madam
else
Chair.
on section, Connie?
Yeah, on that same paragraph, I know we're evoluting versus revoluting. Well, the question is, the very last sentence, it feels, you know, when I combine that with the first sentence that we're just changing, that it sounds like we're trying to run away from hard work. So that's the reason why we're not doing anything, is because it's very complex and very contentious. That's not the case here, is it?
No.
I'm
not sure I understand what your point you're making.
Well, because we're talking about the last sentence about it would be complex and contentious process. So it sounds to me that that's what the minority group says that, and so we're not gonna do a revolution. We're gonna do a evolution and stay in the middle. But that's not the reason we're staying in the middle. It's what this committee is recommending.
So would you recommend just deleting that sentence?
Sure, because I don't think I'm scared of hard work, even if we were going to change it. But it's a fact. It is hard work, I agree. I don't want people to think that that's why we're not doing it, because it's complex. And some people would say that it would be the right thing.
All right. Any other feedback on that? All right, on to section 3. So a number of documents were sent out that tried to get at the suburban opt-out efficiency innovation question. And I don't know if people have time to review that, or in the context of the draft report. We have a lot of feedback, so I don't know. Connie, I think you've got feedback coming from your audio. There we go. So any comments on section 3 or any of the additional materials that were distributed relative to the opt-outs? And again, we can look at the structural or the heading issue that Mayor Hovland raised. We can make it all look the same on that note, but as far as content goes.
Madam Chair, as a person that raised some concerns regarding Section 3, I can live with it largely as presented in that spirit of evolution and not revolution. And I think the term I used last time is the juice worth the squeeze. And frankly, I think it is not. And I can, with some hesitation, live with this. I think we are being canted when we essentially acknowledge if we were redeveloping our transit system from the ground floor up, it would look somewhat different than it currently does. But given its current structure and layout, I can live with this. I do like the part that the suburban transit provider network would not be expanded and that it would be limited to its current activities.
Any other thoughts on section 3?
Madam Chair?
The sense I get is this whole issue is gonna, as a result of budgeting and budget pressures, is gonna get a lot of attention at the legislature, whether we make recommendations or not, because with the change in commuter traffic, congestion, etc., I think there's gonna be wholesale changes in how and what transit is delivered in the region. Mary Jo? Mute. You're muted.
I'm just so not used to this program. Okay, I think Aline was before me, but I'll let her.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You want to go? Okay, I just want to say I appreciate what Connie was saying about it's not that we are afraid of hard work. You know, I think however that might get worded, it's not because it is complex and it is the juice worth the squeeze. But I think, you know, none of us are worried about hard work, but we have to decide if the work that it would take would be worth it. But I'm just asking the question. I love the way you said that, Peter. I mean, when would the juice be worth the squeeze? I'm just curious about that. Like what if I suppose that would be redesigning the whole system. And so maybe that we just leave it at that. But otherwise I am agreeing that this is okay. But it does make me ask the question, we all know that the system could use some help and work, but what would that look like? And we've had so much good information. I don't know what that is, but part of me wants to have a little section that says, and here's ongoing issues that we should be thinking about. But if we haven't had, we just say it whenever there's an appetite for looking at these other issues, here they are. And I don't know what that would be, but just thinking about it.
All right, Eileen and then Connie.
Great, thanks, Madam Chair. I think just kind of agree with the tone. I think it's fine of what's in here. One potential change, which is I think also in line with the potential changes that Jim Hugland might recommend as well under the recommendations, that second bullet, transitioning metro mobility from a base general fund appropriation to a forecasted budgeted program. I would strengthen the language there and say strongly recommend transitioning instead of consider transitioning. We should just do that. That would be a huge benefit to the agency.
All right, thank you, Connie.
Yes, my question was regarding in the section potential action for consideration. We continue to evaluate, and I would like to know what evaluate means. And in my mind, it could be two things based on what we're saying here. Probably to look at the structure, governance structure, what it would be. That's one thing. The other one is that one of the documents I received, I believe Mike Opak from Maple Grove suggest, because sounds like there's debate about efficiency and being effective. And I understand that being in transportation, depending on how you look at something, it can be efficient one way versus the other. And that could be something, and I don't know if you want to mention it in here, that's the specific suggestion to have like an independent financial group to look at the efficiencies and of the metro transit versus suburban, because they can each, looks like they can argue their own way to get their thought across. So that is one thing. And then the third bullet talks about seek long-term funding solutions. is that I wasn't sure if that means more funding. You know, if you have more money, all the problems will go away because all the legislators will be asking about efficiency. As the questions about efficiency come up, it's hard to ask about more funding and more money to solve the problem. So I wasn't sure what that meant about for the system growth and asking more money. That could raise more questions about efficiencies. If you're asking about being efficient or not efficient, and then you're asking for the dollars. So that's the general question I have, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you. Chair Bell?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I want to, one concern that I have about this recommendation, and you touched on it, Madam Chair, a minute ago. I think one of the elephants in the living room is the dire financial condition of the state of Minnesota. And I think if we potentially, or this committee should consider, are we missing an opportunity to have input into how the transit system might be restructured given that dire financial system that exists? My read of the situation is there isn't going to be more money, that there's likely to be less money, and that someone is going to make some decisions about what Metro Transit looks like. I don't know if it'll include the suburban transit providers. I don't know if it'll include Metro Mobility. I don't know if it'll include light rail. But if we totally ignore that fact, we may be missing an opportunity to have an impact on something that I personally believe is coming down the road very quickly at us. And that while I'm the one that used the term that these recommendations are evolutionary, not revolutionary, and I support that, the caveat is that that is in normal budgetary times, not the crises that I think the state of Minnesota is going to be facing. And someone is going to make some decisions. I believe if I were to predict, I would say there's going to be substantial changes to the transit system funding structure in the next year or so, and we're missing an opportunity to have input into that. And that causes me some level of concern.
I see lots of heads nodding. Pat?
Maybe this just goes unsaid, but you know, not only is Peter absolutely right that the state is going to face a whole series of pressing, awful, probably financial decisions, but the transit service, no matter who the provider is, relies principally on students and people going to work to be their customers, and that has been completely changed and almost stopped by this virus. And how fast people resume their normal mobility habits to get to work and to go to school, we just don't know. Will it happen quickly that we resume normal transit mobility activities? I don't think so. It'll be some period of time that happens. So not only does the state face these pretty significant, big financial decisions and what happens with transit, the other big unknown is how fast will people return to their, or will they return to their pre-COVID, pre-recession, pre-whatever this thing is, mobility habits. We just don't know that.
Well, some of us believe they will never return to that normal will never. I mean, there isn't a person that I know in Lakeville that used to ride the bus 5 days a week that thinks they will ever do that ever again, ever.
Madam Chair, at a minimum, perhaps, and I'm sensitive to Connie's point about not avoiding hard work. I'm sensitive to we only have one meeting left, but I'm not sure one perhaps middle ground is to set some priority areas if there is going to be restructuring, that we would encourage the governor and the Met Council to look at these 3 or 4 priority areas. And let me, at the risk of offending people, I think we have to look at, is North Star still viable? And the money that we're putting in there, I think that would be one of the things I would have as a priority. I know it's risky to say, and I'm stepping on, I'm sure, many people's toes when I say that, but I think we have to look that squarely in the face. I would look at the suburban transit providers, and I would look at, do we want metro mobility to be as expansive as it is? It goes beyond the federal guidelines. I know that's in state law now, but I'm not sure that now I know these are very painful things that I'm raising. They might take much more discussion than we have time to give it. But these are the kinds of things that I think are going to happen with or without our input. And so I think perhaps we may want to consider those things happening with our input than without our input. And that's just my list. I'm sure everybody on this call has their own list that may be the same or include some elements or may be very different. But it strikes me that our recommendations are not mindful of the financial environment that we're in.
Okay, so did you just sign up to rewrite section 3 of the report, Peter? Hey, really?
No, I didn't, but I understand what you're saying.
Well, I'm not disagreeing with it, and I saw lots of heads nodding, and so under the umbrella of effectiveness, what we recommend the governor to take a look at, I think, is a fair path to go down. So anybody want to chime in or agree, disagree? Mayor Hovland.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just still looking at that second bullet point under the findings, not the potential actions for consideration, but on the prior page. That last sentence in the second bullet point, the committee concludes the suburban transit model should not be expanded in the region, and regional transit governance should continue to be evaluated for efficiency. Well, the latter part of that, I think, is an obvious finding. But the first one, I'm a little bit concerned about that. First of all, I don't remember us reaching that conclusion. And secondly, I'm thinking about just a report we got from the state demographer at the MLC cities last week. The fastest growing cities over the past 4 years or 10 years have been Lakeville, Woodbury, I'm going memory here, Plymouth, and Maple Grove. Well, if you take the position that the committee concludes the suburban transit model should not be expanded in the region, what does that mean for, south of Lakeville, up towards Rogers? What are we going to do? Hopscotch, skip over the suburban transit providers and bring our own transit system out to those outer regions of the 7-county area? I don't think so.
Mayor Hovland, Lakeville's in Metro Transit, not MVTA.
Oh, it is in. Oh, okay. All right. Well, Plymouth
So is
and Maple are both in Plymouth Metrolink, I think. maybe I'm wrong on some of the park and rides, but you get my point, is that the fastest growing cities in our metropolitan region are the outlying suburbs that still have greenfield available. And
Woodbury's Metro Transit too.
Yeah, we gotta just be careful about what we do there is my only point. I don't mind concluding that we should be that regional governance should continually be evaluated for enhanced opportunities for system efficiencies. But I'm wondering about the first part of that sentence. We shouldn't expand the suburban transit model in the region.
Mayor, I think I brought that up as a topic in the last meeting, and by my mind, I was talking about expansion of additional providers, not territory or expansion of those that are providing. That was just my perspective.
Okay, that makes sense if we're talking about the number of providers, but if we're talking about the model, that language to me is a little bit vague.
Yeah, we can certainly clean that up so that no more systems to be started. And in fact, the more recent trend has been consolidation of suburban systems when you saw the Scott County join the Minnesota Valley. So, Mr. Weaver, did you have something? I see you're unmuted.
I did, Madam Chair. I just wanted to agree with some of the things that have already been said about efficiency being pretty important given the financial condition the state is going to be in. And, I'm one of those people who would use commuter rail from time to time to go to a Twins game. And when I saw the level of subsidy, I started to feel pretty guilty. So I certainly agree that, $17 a ride is a lot of money, public subsidy for that service. And so I do agree with Peter that that's something that should be examined a little more closely. And that jumped out a lot more than any difference in the efficiency of Metro Transit versus the opt-out providers. And as was mentioned earlier, depending on which metrics you use, either one of them comes out on top. Subsidy per passenger is better for Metro Transit in a lot of cases, but the cost per passenger mile is better with the opt-outs in many cases. So it really is in how you view efficiency. And I just didn't see enough difference there to really reach any conclusions on one being more efficient than the other. But it was really North Star that stuck out to me.
Well, and no offense to Chair Bell, but when he said if North Star still made sense, some of us never thought it made sense in the first place. So, but anyway, welcome to the light, Peter. Yeah, I really think.
Hey, I want to be clear. I worked for a governor then, and so I want to be just very, very clear about that.
Yeah, and I'll be very clear. I didn't always support my governor, so. Anyway, I think this issue is going to come to a head. I mean, I think about the red line, with being operated by MVTA and now Metro Transit taking over the operating of that. We have an orange line that's going to open up. We have an MVTA and 2 Metro Transit stations within about 1.5 miles of each other. We'll have the risk of redundant service running up and down that busway from both MVTA and Metro Transit. So, there's a lot of things that there's just not going to be the money to do any longer. So again, Peter, do you want to take a stab at some new language, or how do you want to wrap this up? Mayor Coates, welcome. Maybe then we can let the mayor weigh in and go from there.
Yes.
Mayor Coates, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Hoberg. Yeah, I've been listening in on this whole issue with regard to transit, and I'm a proponent for the opt-outs, simply because I remember the 80s when we didn't have efficient service down in the opt-out communities, and why the opt-out communities became a reality. And it is a very complex governing system. And if we're ever going to touch that, I don't think we do it in a haphazard way. It'll need to be a deep dive into understanding how those services are going to be provided. And we need to make sure that it's going to be efficient and it's going to be effective and cost effective for the people in the opt-out communities, because it is a complex system. And we're looking at how these systems were funded. And when we were on the property tax, that was one thing, and now we're on MVEST. And so everybody is paying into that service. But it is a complex system, and we need to make sure we do it in a very thoughtful way, because it affects a lot of people's lives. And true, we don't know what it's going to look like post-COVID and who's going to continue to operate and travel a lot more. I think there's a lot more work that we have to do rather than to say we dismantle it. I am opposed to dismantling the opt-out community because it's working. Yes, there's funding pressures, but we all are faced with funding pressures. How do we solve it is what we need to do moving forward. So, but if we're going to do a transformation of the transit system, then we need a much deeper discussion and a deeper dive into all of this. And maybe, I don't know right now. I remember back when Representative McElroy was in the House, and because of the issues between Metro Transit and the opt-out communities, because they were competitors, and it was Metro Transit is under the Met Council, there was discussion at the legislature to move the opt-out communities, the Metro, the suburban transit services over to MnDOT. Chair Holberg, I think you remember those discussions back then, and somehow there was just a lot of conflict, and it never went anywhere. It didn't have a strong link forward. Perhaps that's another piece that we need to take a look at. But we can't do that without some deep dive into understanding how we provide transit service within our metropolitan area. Thank you, Chair Holberg.
No problem. Thank you, Peter.
Yes, Chair Holberg. One thing that we may want to do is a couple of points. One is state that this committee realizes the dire financial circumstances that the transit system, that the state of Minnesota is in, and that the transit system is likely to be in. And we could speak to some of the points that you made, that the transit system, or that Pat talked about, that the transit system ridership is potentially going to be significantly different, and that we recognize and appreciate that. And a second point that we could make and strengthen, and one that I would strongly back, is that the guiding principle for the governor in looking at any restructure or elimination of transit services, this is me speaking now, is the efficiency of those services. That we cut the least efficient services. However that gets defined. I think Tom raised a good point that there's not that much difference, and is a difference in passengers or miles. I get that. But if there is low-hanging fruit, i.e. North Star or someplace else, that those things, and we don't have to mention North Star. I'm not even suggesting that we do that. We just mention that we recognize the state's in deep financial conditions. Two, we recognize ridership is likely to be altered. And three, that our priority is cutting or adjusting less efficient services.
Okay. So back to my question, are you going to rewrite the chapter or the paragraph? We'll take a stab at it and send it to you, Peter. Aileen and then Mayor Hovland.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just had a quick question just about that process. When I think a number of us have kind of signed up to either look at specific sections or like how are we going to manage the editing process in the interim? What's your? I assume you have people who are working on it to help. So just kind of curious.
Yeah, so we have really great staff at council. Many of you know that more than I do. I probably look for phone a friend with Judd, but I think maybe if he could give us some kind of timeline for maybe a first rewrite, given the comments that have been discussed today, and get that out at a time frame that works for Judd's team at Met Council, and then you guys can concentrate on your areas of concern for feedback, and then we'll have a second draft that will go out prior to the committee. How does that sound?
Well, Madam Chair and members, that works for me. I guess it would be helpful if the specific members who are going to try to rewrite some of those sections, if they would like to share that with me, because I just want to make sure that we're capturing the right tone and right points. We've clearly taken notes on this and can try to articulate those as best as we can. But if folks would like to share those with us, in the next couple days, I know it's the week of Thanksgiving, it will make it easier for us to be able to get a draft turned around and out to folks maybe as early as next Monday. And then we can have the course of next week in order to be able to send a few different versions out and get the groups input on that, so we're able to land on something late in the week that we can adopt potentially on the 7th.
Mayor Hovland and Jerry next. Mayor.
You have to unmute, Mayor Hovland.
Working on it. I'm working on it. Thank you. Jerry Zhao raised something that's, I think, critically important that we do here because of the work we've all done together and all the hours that we put in. If this were a finding from a court, you would see all of the background facts first, and then you would see the conclusions the court reached, and then you'd see the findings. Well, you see findings in an order, actually, is what you see, is the facts, the findings, and then the order. What we're going to do is have facts, findings, and then we're going to have recommendations. And so to me, if somebody could take a summary of all the minutes that we've got here in terms of who we heard from and what we even if we don't say what we heard from them, as part of the background piece, so that people know what we were relying on in terms of coming to the conclusions we came to. And I think that's the point that Jerry was getting to, which I think is really critical, is that someone who picks this up for the first time over at the legislature or anywhere else needs to know what kind of background work we did to be able to reach the conclusions that we did. So if nobody else wants to work on that, I'll work on it. But I think it's really vitally important that we do that for our own credibility, frankly.
Madam Chair and Jim, I would just like to share that we will, in the final document, it will list all of the meetings. It will include every presentation that has been provided to the council. There will be no editing of any of those documents. So anyone that wants to come back and look at the information that has been shared, the minutes that have been adopted, and the presentations that have been made will all have access to that, and they will be in this final report, which will make up, the a portion of what this overall report will look like. But we want to make sure that everyone who has shared their comments or their voice or their agency or organization's voice in this will be able to be represented in that report. So I can tell you that we've been keeping track of this information all the way through, and I just had a conversation with our staff this morning about making sure that every last piece of that information is shared. So when we get back to the findings or considerations or recommendations, whatever they are, all of that, you'll be able to go back and look at that information and the discussions that we had or this group had in order to sort through that. So I just want to make sure everybody knows that the supporting information will all be included in this report. We wanted to make sure that as far as the findings portion of this, which I think is where this group lands, we wanted to get that out in front of everybody first to make sure that we were kind of traveling down the right road on that.
All right. I think that's important, Judd. Thank you. And so we'll have a reference to everything being appended as a basis for our report. But I still think it would be helpful if we had, from a backgrounding standpoint, to Jerry's point earlier, an abbreviation or a truncated version of everything that we did. Who we heard from, some sort of summary of that, and then reference those appended materials reflecting all of the meeting minutes and the other things that we were provided, and then go to the conclusions or the findings and then the recommendations, I would say.
That's good, and I agree with that. And I will also point out that the website that we have created for this Governor's Blue Ribbon Commission will also be up on the council's website with all of this information for years to come as well. So that information will be very public, but your point is well noted, Jim and Jerry, and we will do our best to make sure that we try to meet that.
Yeah, thank you. And I have two specific points that I want to make about the third item, the transit services one. My thinking is first, I would not support the idea of expanding the opt-out services merely from public finance perspective. We learned that Southwest, where the history, the background of it, where started this opt-out model was because at that time, I think transit service were highly subsidized by property tax. At that time, understandably, I think some people in the suburban area would worry that where too much money has been used to the central part of the metro. But right now, since it has long been shifted to the more sales tax-based system, the original background was no longer there. So overall, I would not support moving toward that direction. And the second point is about where in general, I like this idea of more regional service, possible additional consolidation, but I would not recommend we do anything in a rush about the current Southwest system, where in particular, where a lot of good points have been raised with this high level of uncertainty with COVID, with financial condition change, with who would know about the new mobility chain. I think that would be a much larger question of how, if we would like to change the current transit governance model. And I would also add that it's good in the summary that we mentioned the need to further measure efficiency. And it has been raised that efficiency would be measured in many different ways that may not come to all consistent results. And I would urge that where we not only mention efficiency, but it's also where efficiency, equity, and regional choice, many other aspects in regional governance. But overall, it's the second point, is a lot more needs to be discussed before we recommend any sort of change. So those are my 2 points.
Great, thank you. Any other comments? So, Jed, I'm a little concerned about your timeline. I don't want your staff to have to be working over the weekend. So, committee members, is it feasible for you to have edits or your ideas just in kind of rough form to Judd by end of day tomorrow, or?
That would be great.
Thumbs down, or do you want to go into next week? I mean, I kind of look at, we either have to have a deadline sometime tomorrow for us to get stuff into you, or Monday. being it's a holiday weekend. And if we don't have it to you until like Monday, then we shouldn't expect it back till late Tuesday or early Wednesday.
Madam Chair, Madam Chair, I gave my 3 points that I think, and Judd, I'd be happy to write those up and send them to you.
That would be great, Peter. Thank you very much. And the trick is, I just want to make sure that we are capturing this exactly the way that the committee members want versus us trying to add our flavor to it, because that just isn't going to be the same as how you're trying to say it.
Connie, you're still open, Mike. Well, thank you.
Madam Chair, one other question is the report that we got. I don't have it right in front of me here on the screen, but did you send that out in Word, Judd, or was it a PDF?
Jim, it was in a PDF. I will send it out in a Word document right now. We were just trying to have a conversation first before everybody started doctoring it. So I'll make sure that everybody gets a copy of the Word document, and please make sure you point out where you make changes, or if you're just going to write a different section, use a different colored font, or use track changes or something like that so we can keep track. That will make it much easier on our end.
I'll do that. You'll have all of my changes in track form.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, time frame is by tomorrow, end of day too soon? You want to go into next week, or thumbs up, thumbs down?
Madam Chair, were you thinking that if we got it to them by the end of day tomorrow, they'd be able to work on it on Wednesday? If that's not to be the case, then I would think that if we had until the end of the day on Wednesday, because they're not going to work on it till next week anyway, I'd get like a little clarification on that.
Well, here, let's do it this way. Is everybody good if we send you the next draft on a week from Wednesday? Does that give you enough time? Because then we'll have like 24 hours for feedback to get it ready to go out in the packet on Friday. So if you want something turned around to send to the committee by a week from Wednesday, what would be the deadline for committee members to provide you with information?
I would say that would be Monday.
Monday, 10 a.m.?
Sure.
Does that work for all the committee members? By Monday, 10 p.m., send in your comments, or what'd your mom say? Keep it to yourself.
Right.
All right.
Monday, as early in the day as possible would be appreciated. So our folks.
We'll just say Monday at 10. Monday at 10, the staff's going to take over and start putting together their best shot at reflecting our changes and comments. Anything else? Speak now. All right. Well, everybody have a great Thanksgiving weekend. Stay healthy, happy. Thanks again.